Inside the Illini Big Ten College Football is brought to you by your local Anheuser-Busch distributors, O'Brien Auto Park of Urbana, Hickory River Smokehouse in Urbana, and WAND.
Welcome to Inside the Illini Big Ten Football here for the final two games of the 2013 season. Yes, that's official now with Illinois losing their 7th game of the season. Hi, I'm Matt Lovelace here at Hickory River Smokehouse in Urbana as we get ready for the Purdue game. We'll also talk about what was a mostly exciting Ohio State game, at least for about 40 minutes there, and we'll get to that topic. We've also got Big Ten topics. Seems like we have a Big Ten title game matchup, plus all the news you can find on the Boilermakers right here over the next hour. And joining me, as usual, is our panel of experts. Matt Daniels with the Champaign News-Gazette. How you doing?
Wonderful. It's hard to believe that the season will be over in about 7 days.
Yes, it absolutely will be. Steve Kelly with Sports Talk 1400. Steve, let's get your initial thoughts on the Ohio State game. What'd you think?
Well, I thought Ohio State came out strong, obviously, and jumping to that 28-0 lead. Then they kind of took a little snooze, so to speak, during the ball game. Illinois, as you mentioned, played competitive for a while there. And then I don't think Ohio State was trying to score late, but they did anyway on those 2 late runs that Illinois couldn't tackle Carlos Hyde. So another loss, 20th straight loss. You expected the loss. There were some bright spots, and we can talk about that as we go along.
We've seen 22 games of the, I guess, Tim Beckman era, as you'd call it. Comparatively, they didn't seem like they were that down after this game. They probably felt pretty good about the performance they put up for most of it.
Yeah, I mean, the offense stood out after kind of a slow start. I mean, Nathan Shieldhouse is putting up numbers we haven't seen from him in his 4 years here in Champaign-Urbana. The defense is just, it's a mess. I don't know how else you can describe it, and that kind of falls on Tim Beckman's shoulders. He came to Illinois with the defensive background, and
Right.
Tim Banks is feeling the heat as well. So the defense needs to show some mighty improvement against a very, very bad Purdue offense. So maybe today's kind of the cure-all for Illinois' defense.
And one topic I do want to talk about, we'll throw a picture up here. I took this picture with 1:40 left before kickoff of the student section. There was a point in the game where they couldn't finish off the block I because the crowd was so small. Number 3 is in town. Your football team may be struggling, but what do you think that says about the state of the program that they can't fill about 15% of the student section?
No one really cares, to be quite blunt. Bob Osmussen, longtime writer here at the News-Gazette, he joked that the block I looked like the block comma on Saturday against the Buckeyes, and I saw that photo too, and just everything that transpired within that, and that just looks horrible for the university. There's really no other way to say it. With the student section just not coming out, just seems they have a lot better things to do on Saturday mornings than go to a football game.
Well, you had a couple things going against you in that situation. One is the way Illinois is playing, the fact they've lost. 2, it was an early game. Students don't normally hit the early games anyway, but as you said, you took the photo late in the game. But
Right, and the day before, Illinois had just lost a basketball recruit.
Right.
And just had another one fake them out. Cliff Alexander picking Kansas. So it was a tough 48 hours to be an Illini fan, and I think that showed. It was a little disappointing, though. But no one, including the people at this table, really gave Illinois much of a chance. But they hung in. We've got some pretty exciting highlights coming up on Inside the Illini Big Ten Football. Hi folks, welcome back to Inside the Illini Big Ten Football. Going into the Ohio State game, Illinois had lost 19 straight Big Ten games, so most people gave them about a 100% chance of losing. They were underdogs by 33 points at home to the number 3 Buckeyes. The Illini, though, were intent on proving us wrong for about 40 minutes. Let's take a look at the highlights.
The Buckeyes strolled into Memorial Stadium still with a chance at the BCS title game and on a historic win streak, one shy of the program record of 22. And Urban Meyer's boys came out like they wanted both. 3 plays into the game, Ohio State quarterback Braxton Miller had nothing but open space for 70 yards. It only took 36 seconds, but Ohio State led 7-0. Later it was 14-0 when the Illini were trying to push it downfield. Nate Shieldhouse looking toward the sideline, but it's tipped and into the hands of Bradley Roby. He had all the real estate to work with, a 63-yard interception return for a touchdown. Then a 21-0 lead was stretched to 28-0 early in the third. A crowd half full of Buckeye fans saw their 22nd win in a row in hand.
That's the Achilles heel. We've got to start faster, especially when you're playing explosive offenses like that.
But there must have been something stuck under the gas pedal, because Illinois managed to jar it loose in the second. D'Angelo Bentley returning a punt. Yes, Illinois forced a punt 67 yards, cutting through the Buckeyes, becoming the first player in program history to return a kickoff and a punt for a touchdown in the same season. Illinois managed to cut the deficit to 21 by the half, which seemed far less daunting after the bad start. With the ball out of the locker room, the Illini did something with it. A 75-yard drive capped by a short pass to tight end Evan Wilson, and suddenly it was a two-score game. After trading a few scores, the Illini pulled within 12 thanks to a Josh Ferguson rushing touchdown, and with 5 minutes left, Illinois was in striking distance.
Those kids are fighters. I love our seniors. I love what they're giving us.
But the only distance we saw from then on was the distance Carlos Hyde put between himself and the Illinois defense. Within 2 minutes, Hyde had 2 rushing scores of more than 50 yards. 2 minutes. That's all it took to go from a ball game to a blowout. Ohio State won 60-35. Illinois lamented missed opportunities, but know they hung around longer than most anyone expected.
I thought our players battled to the dang end. They never came up short. They continued to fight.
I was just so happy with the way we responded. I mean, we stood up and we fought till the 15th round.
We've talked about the defensive struggles. We've talked about the losing streak. Let's start with the good that Illinois did. What did they do well for that stretch in the middle of the game?
Steve Hull had another superb game, back-to-back 100-plus yards receiving. Nathan Shielos was able to run the ball consistently at times. His throwing numbers, like I mentioned earlier, the best he's had during his time here in Champaign. Josh Ferguson was able to kind of get free a little bit. Those are about the only highlights, I should say. Oh, D'Angelo Bentley. I'm forgetting the most important one. D'Angelo Bentley, 67-yard punt return where he broke a few tackles, became the first Illinois player in history to have both a punt return and a kickoff return this season for a touchdown. So the special teams were special at times against the Buckeyes.
That record was a little surprising to me. I hadn't thought much about it, but when they started digging on that to find nobody else had done that in the same season, the kickoff return for a score and the punt return, so he puts his name in the record book. You mentioned Shieldhouse. He had 2 early interceptions, but seemed to hang in there okay. Of course, when you're down 28-0, that hurts, but he played really well after that, I thought. And again, I asked him after the game how his arm was feeling because he threw 50 passes again, and he said he's hanging in there pretty well. His body was a little sore.
Right. It's Steve. He's 8 catches, 105 yards, past 4 games, 29 catches. 493 yards and 3 touchdowns. That's an average game of about 7 catches, 125 yards. He's really emerged as a go-to guy, especially when they need like third and short yardage. He's a guy you can find pretty easily. Big problem, obviously, you mentioned the 28-0 hole. There was a stretch there in the middle, and it was a critical stretch because Ohio State could have put Illinois away. Illinois outscored them 35-19. But in the end, like you said, they might not have been trying to score 2 late touchdowns, but Carlos Hyde broke for a couple of 50-plus yarders.
Yeah, and Tim Beckman mentioned this after the Indiana loss 2 weeks ago, and he mentioned it again this week and also after the Ohio State game. Just the defense kind of trying to do too much at times, they're overrunning some plays. They're realizing they need a critical stop here, and they're trying to do more than they can to really, with the talent that they have, and they just need to stay assignment sound and fill their gap responsibility, and that was not the case late against the Buckeyes, and Carlos Hyde made him pay for it.
Yeah, they weren't really trick plays, were they? He just handed it to him, and he ran it into the line. All of a sudden, he comes out the other side and basically goes untouched on both of them, and that got him the Big Ten Player of the Week honors. He rushed for 246 yards in the game.
That's been a big problem. We complain about 100-yard rushers.
That's an understatement.
Yes, it is. Some teams complain about allowing 100-yard rushers. Illinois has a 200-yard rusher allowance problem. Braxton Miller even broke for 186 yards. The one thing I was impressed with was how they managed to shut down the passing game. And, of course, Miller's such a good athlete that he turns those broken down passing options into runs. But he was only, I think, 13 to 29 on the day, 150 yards. They couldn't really get the air game going.
Yeah, and I don't know if that is just a case of Braxton Miller just being inaccurate with his throws, or if it was really Illinois' defense. I know a lot of times on his throws he was almost, slinging the ball sidearm. So it just
I saw a lot of those short arms, sidearms.
It seemed that was more Braxton Miller's fault than Illinois' secondary kind of forcing those mistakes.
And plus, they didn't need to throw the ball.
I was going to say, traditionally you like making a team one-dimensional, but when that one dimension absolutely rolls over you, it's tough to overcome. But I mentioned it being close there. Ohio State, before those two Carlos Hyde runs, was only up 50 yards in the yardage battle, which was a positive sign. But now Ohio State, they might have some ground to make up in the polls.
Oh yeah, they didn't come into Champaign and blow out Illinois
No.
like many expected, and they didn't earn any style points, and that was reflected in the polls this week. And Urban Meyer, is not a fan of the BCS by any means, and Saturday's victory makes him even less of a fan of the BCS standings.
Urban Meyer, he joins a crowd of about 3 million people who agree with him.
Yeah, that's right. He's got, 22 straight wins now, and hasn't lost as head coach at Ohio State, tied with Woody Hayes for the longest streak in Columbus.
Meyer wasn't talking about this when he was winning championships with Florida, was he?
Not at all.
Interesting predicament he's in. We'll actually talk about that. We're going to get into the leaders division, how other teams are gaining ground and about to jump the Buckeyes in the BCS standings. That's next on Inside the Illini, Big Ten Football.
The Inside the Illini Weekly MVP recognizes the top Illinois player from the last Fighting Illini game. Once again, a huge day from senior receiver Steve Hull. He had 8 catches for 105 yards and a touchdown. He's got 29 catches in his last 4 games and has taken a commanding lead as Illinois' top statistical receiver, 669 yards and 4 touchdowns this season.
Welcome back to Inside the Illini Big Ten Football. The lead story in the leaders division for the last 22 games now has been Ohio State tying a program record winning streak. We saw them get win number 10 of this season for what happened around the rest of the division. We go to Eric Harold for the highlights.
Thank you, Matt. In the leaders division, we have number 22, Whiskey, taking on Indiana, and Indiana would not look good early. James White busts through their defense. No one is going to catch him. He's at midfield to the 40, to the 30, to the 20, to the 10, touchdown. James White had a monster day, 205 yards, 93 of them there, touchdown. They're up early. Then, Jared Abbrederis, you see him score through the air. This time he scores on the ground. Takes the end around and puts him up 27-0. Then Wisconsin says, you know what, that play worked, let's see it again. Jared Abbrederis, and no one stays home, no one stops him, and he sprints into the end zone. Wisconsin blows out Indiana 51-3. Penn State led by Christian Hackenberg taking on Purdue. The Boilermakers still looking for their first Big Ten win, and this does not help as they give up the touchdown to Bill Belton. They go down 7-0, but they would answer. Danny Etling goes to Justin Sins. He scores, brings them back within a touchdown. Later, they would find themselves down by 14 again. Hackenberg, under pressure, throws to Adam Brenneman. Touchdown, Penn State. They go up 28-7. Purdue would hang around as Danny Etling takes it, keeps it himself, runs right, and he gets into the end zone. Brings them to within 1 touchdown, but it's not enough. Purdue falls to Penn State 45-21. And taking a look at the leaders division standings, Ohio State still undefeated. They'll look to remain that way later today against the Hoosiers. Meanwhile, 1 game behind Wisconsin will have a pretty big test later today against number 25 Minnesota. Also later today, Illinois will take on Purdue. 2 teams will enter. 1 will leave with their first Big Ten win. And now we return to the Inside the Illini crew.
The big takeaway from the week, guys, is the fact that Baylor jumped Ohio State in the AP poll. Now, that one doesn't matter in the BCS formula, but I think Harris Poll voters and coaches are going to see that gap close. And plus, I looked at the percentage points. The Bears are now only 13 ten-thousandths between the Buckeyes and the BCS poll. And of course, Baylor playing Oklahoma State, they get that win. That math is going to work out in their favor. Ohio State's just in a bad place right now in terms of that.
I think they need to beat Indiana 70-0 or 77-0 this afternoon, and hopefully Baylor, for the Buckeye fans, hopefully Baylor can lose by about 4 touchdowns to Mike Gundy's team down in Stillwater. And Ohio State's got a lot of pieces that need to fall their way if they want to be in the final 2 in the BCS.
Fast forward me, please, to next season when we have the playoff.
Yes, absolutely. And we obviously heard Urban Meyer's comments calling it a flawed system. It made a lot of news this week, but he wasn't saying anything revolutionary. He's been saying what people have been saying for 15 years now with the BCS.
Yeah, and I mean it's true. It's a flawed system, but it's one that you have to credit too for the kind of the emergence of college football. I mean, people are watching games late into the season that they weren't before. People are talking about it, and that was kind of the whole idea of college football. It garners more attention, positive, negative. It's still attention, and people are paying attention to what's going on with the sport.
If I was Urban Meyer, I'd be thinking more about 2 schools from his arch-rival state of Michigan, because they got to play the Wolverines yet, and most likely Michigan State, that's pretty much a done deal now.
Yeah.
So he needs to take care of that business before he can think about anything else.
And that'll be good. I mean, getting to play Michigan State for the Big Ten championship, if they get a win there, that will help the math a little bit. But it doesn't help that Florida State plays Idaho this week and is favored by 56 points.
56?
You mean you don't foresee Indiana beating Ohio State today? I don't know why you wouldn't.
Here's why. Because we got to talk about Wisconsin next. The Badgers getting a 51-3 win a week after the Hoosiers scored 52 points on Illinois. They score 3 against Wisconsin.
Yeah, that just shows you the unpredictable nature of college football. And Indiana's offense was in high octane against Illinois. I think you could say that about any offense that's played Illinois this year. And I think Wisconsin they've kind of quietly gone about their business and just keep knocking off teams. And the losses they had early in the year to Arizona State and Ohio State just seem like it never even happened because they've been on such a roll lately. But they did happen, so.
Let's talk about Indiana there, since we got the Wisconsin side. Hoosiers are kind of their backs against the wall when it comes to getting to a bowl game, a team that hoped they could get there.
Well, when I saw them a couple weeks ago, I thought, well, these guys can't stop anybody, but they ought to be able to score on anybody. They proved that earlier. They scored, 28 on Michigan State earlier in the year. Then they go to Wisconsin and lay a 3-point egg, so I don't know what to think about them. I'm guessing they'll beat Purdue, but they're not going to beat Ohio State.
People in Bloomington, Indiana are already full go into basketball season.
That's what happened last year as well. Of course, those Hoosiers were ranked number 1 for much of the season last year. Until they came to Illinois. Want to do a basketball segment?
Hey, we can if you need to.
No, next up we'll talk about the Legends Division. Steve alluded to it. Everything's pretty much wrapped up there. We have a clear front runner, because we did talk about those last few weeks, how important they were. And looks like we've fleshed it all out. We have a path to the title game. We'll talk about that next on Inside the Illini, Big Ten Football.
The Inside the Illini Play of the Week is sponsored by your local Anheuser-Busch distributor, Ronchetti Distributing. Since it made history, the honor goes to Viangelo Bentley. The sophomore defensive back and kick returner had his second return touchdown of the season, slicing through Ohio State for a 67-yard return on a punt. He became the first player in program history to run back both a kick and a punt in the same season.
Welcome back to Inside the Illini Big Ten Football. Just a few weeks ago, the Legends Division was still kind of up in the air. We had Nebraska, Michigan, even Minnesota in the running, but now everything's coming up Spartans. We go back to Eric Harold for the highlights from Week 12.
Thank you, Matt. We start the Legends Division with number 16, Michigan State against Nebraska. R.J. Shelton takes a pitch around the left side and in. Touchdown, Michigan State. They lead 10-0. Nebraska would answer. Tommy Armstrong Jr. looks downfield down the right side to Sam Birch, catches it at the 10 and runs it in for the score. 10-7, Michigan State at that point. Later, second quarter, Jeremy Langford takes a handoff, cuts upfield, muscles his way into the end zone. Michigan State takes a 2-touchdown lead. Michigan State would keep piling on as Connor Cook throws to Keith Mumphrey, stretches out for it, makes the catch. 41-28, Michigan State is your final Spartans win. Michigan taking on Northwestern. You would see a lot of these guys in regulation, field goals all the way. This one is with time expiring. Brendan Gibbons gets set up, not a lot of time, but he boots it through the uprights, ties it up at 9. We're going to overtime. First OT, Devin Gardner takes a snap, fakes a handoff, throws right to Jake Budd. His big tight end puts him up 16-9. Northwestern would answer. Kane Coulter scores from short yardage, ties it up at 16, but they would be down 27-19 in the third OT. This is their last chance. Simeon looks downfield, throws it, one last prayer, and it is incomplete. Northwestern loses a heartbreaker, and Michigan comes away with the victory. Taking a look at the Legends Division standings, Michigan State still on top, undefeated in the Big Ten, on a big-time roll heading into the last part of the season. Minnesota and Nebraska behind 2 games. Iowa and Michigan stuck in the middle, and Northwestern trails far behind, still looking for their first Big Ten win. And now we return to the Inside the Illini crew.
Let's start with Michigan State getting themselves one step closer to the Big Ten title game with a win over Northwestern today. They clinch it. Does anybody want to pick against that?
No. I'm gonna go with the Spartans in that one. Mark D'Antonio's squad is rolling. Their offense is showing improvement. Their defense is as stout as ever, and I don't see anyone stopping Michigan State until possibly Ohio State in the Big Ten title game in 2 weeks.
And Northwestern just keeps figuring out ways to lose games. They'll probably figure out how to break out of that, maybe not this week, but next, when they play in Champaign.
What makes you think that?
But they're due to get a win. I just don't think it's going to be against the Spartans.
All right, let's go down the list. Minnesota is 8-2. Obviously, they were 8-2 last week. They set out last week, but this team's pretty fired up right now.
Yeah, I think it's a huge game. I mean, they're playing Wisconsin. Paul Bunyan's axe is on the line.
Right.
Minnesota hasn't won that game since 2003 when Glenn Mason was the coach and Lawrence Maroney and Marion Barber were running over everyone in the Big Ten. So it's kind of a huge proving ground for Minnesota to see if they're for real or not. I know they've already had some key wins this year against Nebraska and overcoming Jerry Kill's illness and all that's come with it. So it's a huge test for the Golden Gophers today.
It's a battle of top 25 teams.
Right.
Minnesota has snuck into the top 25.
And we're not talking basketball either.
23 in one poll, 25 in the other, but I think Wisconsin handles them.
Yeah, and it was nice to see that, I guess it was an 8-2 team. It was only a matter of time before they crept into the rankings there. Now we're going down the list to Nebraska. They kind of got behind to Michigan State. They stayed behind. They did put up 28 points against the Spartans.
Yeah, maybe they need a Hail Mary today to beat Penn State. But the heat's on in Lincoln for Bo Pelini, and he's 7-3 in a lot of places. That guarantees the coach another year, but not for those fans in red out in Nebraska. So a win today against Penn State would help his job security greatly.
The term "the heat is on" is really a relative term, isn't it?
Yes.
When you look around college football, you look at what's going on in some programs. He's 7-3 and the heat's on.
Right. Yeah, a couple of 0-6 teams are going to go at it today in West Lafayette, and the heat doesn't necessarily feel on. It just people want to get off the schneid there. Michigan, we'll finally talk about. They finally got to running positive yardage in a 3 overtime win over Northwestern.
Yeah, they got Iowa today, and Jeremy Gallen's a wide receiver for them. He just surpassed 1,000 yards on the year and has a chance, if he has another good day, to kind of vault up that single-season list, past Mario Manningham possibly as the number 2 all-time in single-season history. Running the ball is the least of Michigan's concerns. If they can throw the ball, they should do okay.
Well, their special teams made a nice play late in that game, didn't they? When they got the kick team on to tie it up in regulation with the holder sliding into place and getting it down. But I watched the tail end of that ball game. I said, can either one of these teams score a touchdown? And the answer was no until overtime.
And we'll talk about Northwestern here. 6-game losing streak in a season that's probably oddly reminiscent of Illinois' 2011 season, how they started off so hot. Here are their losses in Big Ten play. By 10 against Ohio State in a primetime game. By 3 versus Minnesota. In overtime to Iowa. By 3 to Nebraska on a Hail Mary. And 3 overtimes against Michigan. Kind of been hard luck for Northwestern, but a decent team will find a way to.
Oh yeah, hard luck is an understatement. They've had no luck at all.
Right.
But yeah, they need to try to rebound, and it doesn't get any easier with Michigan State today.
Or Illinois the following week.
I think it's easier for that one.
We'll see. That should be an interesting game. A couple of programs hoping to improve themselves a little bit. Coming up next, are Inside the Illini Spotlight. One of a handful of junior college transfers was quietly registering on the stat sheet. Not so quiet last week. We'll talk about Zane Petty coming up on Inside the Illini Big Ten Football. Welcome back to Inside the Illini Big Ten Football, talking about some of the more unsung Illinois football players. His name was just a name on the list of junior college transfers last winter, but he was billed as a guy who could come in and contribute. Now you look at the stat sheet, and he is, and none were bigger than his contributions against the number 3 team in the country. Our own Noah Newman catches up with Zane Petty in our Inside the Illini Spotlight.
Last January, California native Zane Petty made the biggest move of his life, moving across the country for a chance to play Big Ten football.
It was 10 degrees, and I had never been anything like that. I had to go to the store and buy a new jacket.
Fortunately, he says that was the toughest part of the move.
The area is nice, and people are nice out here, so all that transition was not too hard.
Since transferring from American River College in Sacramento, family visits have been few and far between.
Little sister came to visit me once, and my dad and older sister were here last week, and that's all the family I've seen since January.
Dad and sister were in the stands last Saturday for his best performance yet as he racked up a career-high 15 tackles.
They try to watch every game on TV. They have Big Ten Network out there in California, so they watch every game on TV, but it was really cool to have them actually at the game.
As Zane gets more and more comfortable with his new home, he's becoming more effective on the field. The numbers speak for themselves. 10 or more tackles in 3 of his last 5 games.
We're proud where he is, with his development. We definitely think his best football is still ahead of him, as he continues to get stronger and he continues to gain experience, within the system.
It was all a new thing. It was all new weather, new people, so that was kind of more difficult. But now that I'm more comfortable with the coaches and can just go talk to Coach Banks at any time, and more comfortable with the people that I'm playing with, it does help on the field too.
Guys, Zane Petty has played in all 10 games this year, started the last 5, kind of got an opportunity when Barton went out, and he's been pretty impactful. 14 tackles against Wisconsin, 15 last week. Now, you might say that's a product of why are all these guys getting to the secondary for all these tackles, but he's been a guy who's been there and who's been able to contribute.
Yeah, no, and it's not bad numbers at all for a guy that walked on at Colorado State, didn't really play there, then went the junior college route, put up some really impressive numbers at American River College the last 2 years, and came here and had a shoulder ailment that had required surgery and knocked him out of all spring ball. That kind of set him back, and didn't really stand out in Camp Rantoul back in August, but he kind of slowly and steadily he's kind of made his way into the lineup. And I mean, it doesn't seem like it, but every time at the end of the game you look at the tackle leaders, his name's always up there among the leaders.
Yeah, we had to dig for his name there for a while. Who's this guy playing out there? But he's got 63 tackles on the season now, which ranks him 4th or 5th on the team, and kind of surprisingly. But with that said, you got to look at the missed tackles on all those guys that run for more than 200 yards. The 5 players this season that have done that, they're getting into the secondary, and somebody's not getting him down.
Yeah, I think so. And you, I mean, Matt, you were at every practice, and you were in Rantoul. Did you see anything from Petty? I mean, going into the season, did you think what Beckman was saying, that he was going to be a guy who'd come in and be
No, he wasn't really a player that, Tim Beckman mentioned a lot in Rantoul. I know when we talked about the secondary with the Illinois coach, he brought up some true freshmen like Jalen Dunlap and Darius Mosley, and Petty kind of fell by the wayside. I know I talked to him a few times in Rantoul, and the only thing that really stood out to me about Petty was his hair. He's got kind of like a faux hawk going on there that no one else.
I call it a fro hawk.
A fro hawk. Okay, we'll go with that one. That's what Steve's going to wear next week for the final show here. But yeah, that's the only thing that really stood out to me. I know he, like I said, had some shoulder